The first time I sat across from the doctors in that sterile white room, I believed them. I was desperate for relief. The burning in my joints, the relentless ache under my skin, the migraines that blurred my vision. I thought they could save me. The doctor was a polished man named David Harper, a lead researcher for Virogen Pharmaceuticals. His voice was warm, reassuring. He promised they had a new drug, an experimental treatment for chronic pain. He said it could give me my life back. What he didn't say, what I didn't learn until too late, was that I wasn't a patient to them. I was a product. My pain wasn't a problem to solve, it was a resource to exploit. The injections began 2 weeks later. They called them clinical trials, but I quickly realized they weren't testing safety or dosage. They were testing how much pain I could endure, how far they could push my body before it broke. The side effects were brutal. Fevers that left me convulsing in bed, skin so raw it felt like fire, blackouts that stole hours from my memory. When I reported the symptoms, they brushed me off. Normal reactions, they said, stay the course. I was too exhausted to fight, too hopeful to walk away. The treatments escalated. I signed papers I didn't read, trusting the lies they fed me. My face appeared in their promotional materials, smiling and healthy, while inside I was crumbling. It wasn't until a junior lab tech, an intern named Melissa, slipped me a flash drive that I saw the truth. The drive contained internal reports, encrypted files showing that Virogen knew the drugs were toxic. They weren't testing treatments for chronic pain. They were building a portfolio of patented compounds, using my suffering to fast-track approvals, inflate their stock, and boost their market value. I confronted David Harper in his office, shaking with rage. He smiled, cold and detached, and said, "You signed the consent forms. You're ours now." Something inside me snapped. I left the building, stumbled into the cold, and sat on a park bench until dawn. I replayed his words, the casual cruelty, the way my body trembled from the latest injection, and as the sun rose over the city skyline, I made a decision. If they were going to profit from my pain, I would turn their profit into ashes. I spent months recovering, regaining my strength while gathering information. I learned everything I could about Virogen, its board of directors, its partnerships, its financial vulnerabilities. I studied their stock patterns, memorized their quarterly reports, traced the web of shell companies shielding their assets. Melissa became my ally, feeding me classified data from inside the company. When the time was right, I struck the first blow. I leaked internal memos to a freelance journalist detailing falsified safety trials and ghostwritten testimonials. The story hit local news first, then spread nationally. Virogen's PR team scrambled, issuing denials, blaming rogue employees. The stock dipped slightly, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I began forging insider tips, feeding them to major investors, hints of regulatory investigations, whispers of a pending lawsuit. I knew how easily fear spreads on the trading floor. Stockholders panicked, began quietly dumping shares. At the same time, I manipulated online forums and social media, posing as disillusioned employees and whistleblowers. I leaked redacted documents showing how executives had buried reports of patient deaths linked to the experimental drugs. The panic grew. I watched David Harper's face on the news as he issued a public statement, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the cracks beneath. He blamed misinformation, denied wrongdoing, assured investors that Virogen's future was stable. But behind closed doors, the board was fracturing. Internal emails Melissa forwarded to me revealed arguments, accusations, threats of resignation. Legal teams were scrambling to contain the damage, but the walls were crumbling faster than they could patch them. I took the final step by hacking into Virogen's secured servers. Melissa's credentials made it easy. I found incriminating data, forged trial results, secret payments to regulators, off-the-books accounts siphoning millions. I packaged it all into an anonymous drop and sent it to federal investigators, major news outlets, and influential financial bloggers. The fallout was immediate. Virogen's stock plummeted overnight, billions evaporating in a heartbeat. The CEO was forced to resign, then arrested when evidence surfaced tying him personally to the cover-ups. David Harper was named in multiple lawsuits, his assets frozen, his reputation in ruins. I watched it all from a safe distance, my body still aching but my mind clear for the first time in years. They had turned my pain into profit. Now I was turning their empire into dust. The headlines screamed scandal. Virogen Pharmaceuticals stocks tanked overnight, billions vanishing in a whirl of panic and blame. But this was only the beginning. The storm I'd unleashed was gaining strength, and I wasn't about to let it die out. I made sure the right people saw the internal emails and encrypted files Melissa had helped me smuggle out. The files included secret correspondence between David Harper and the board, detailing their deliberate suppression of adverse trial results. Payment records to regulatory officials appeared alongside photos of lavish parties funded by consulting fees. Within days, federal investigators descended on Virogen's headquarters. News crews camped outside the glass and steel building, capturing footage of agents carrying out boxes of files. Employees were questioned, subpoenas were issued. The carefully polished surface of the company's reputation shattered. David Harper tried to play the victim. He held a press conference, voice shaking, blaming disgruntled former employees and unauthorized data leaks. But as more evidence surfaced, his words rang hollow. Even his most loyal investors were abandoning him. I wasn't done. I created an online persona, posing as an anonymous whistleblower with intimate knowledge of Virogen's illegal operations. I posted on niche financial forums, leaking detailed insider information about falsified drug trial data, shadow accounts, and offshore holdings. The panic spread from retail investors to major institutions. Stockbrokers whispered of massive shorting opportunities, and the market responded with a feeding frenzy. Virogen's stock continued to nosedive. But I needed to ensure the collapse wasn't just financial. I wanted Harper and his inner circle to feel the weight of their greed, crushing them from all sides. I dug deeper into David Harper's life. His family, his private investments, his secret real estate acquisitions, nothing was off limits. I planted fabricated files, suggesting Harper had siphoned millions into offshore trusts, some tied to shell companies implicated in human rights violations. These files were anonymously sent to investigative journalists and watchdog organizations. The media erupted with new allegations. Stories emerged linking Harper to questionable land deals, ties to criminal enterprises, and possible insider trading. His name became toxic. His face, once plastered on glossy magazine covers as a visionary CEO, was now splashed across screens as the face of corporate corruption. Meanwhile, I kept feeding Melissa new instructions from the shadows. She carefully released select files to federal investigators, ensuring the leaks seemed organic. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of systematic abuse. Drug trials that targeted vulnerable populations, researchers silenced by threats of termination, and patients like me whose suffering was swept under the rug for the sake of quarterly profits. The pressure on Virogen intensified. Lawsuits piled up, class actions from former patients, wrongful death claims from grieving families, shareholder suits alleging fraud, all hammering at the company's crumbling walls. One morning, I awoke to see Harper's face splashed across every news outlet. He had been arrested. The charges were staggering: securities fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. His mugshot showed a broken man, stripped of the arrogance that had once made him untouchable. His carefully combed hair was disheveled, his eyes hollow. But it wasn't enough. The rest of the board tried to distance themselves, but my web was too tightly woven. I had planted false confessions in the form of anonymous tips, implicating key executives in schemes ranging from insider trading to racketeering. I forged memos leaked from a disgruntled compliance officer, showing how they had collectively agreed to suppress trial results. As the FBI widened their investigation, executives began to turn on each other, cutting deals to save themselves. One by one, they were arrested, their fortunes frozen, their families dragged into public humiliation. Melissa, my silent ally, disappeared quietly, slipping away before anyone could connect her to the leaks. She sent me a final message. They'll never see me coming. I stayed in the shadows, watching as Harper's empire collapsed like a rotting mansion. The stock continued to plummet, dragging down pension funds, investment portfolios, and even rival companies with exposure to Virogen's assets. The public outcry was deafening. Patients demanded accountability. Regulators scrambled to impose fines and sanctions, but it was too little, too late. I had set the fire, and it was consuming everything. Through it all, I felt the ache in my body, the pain Virogen had promised to cure but had only worsened. But alongside the pain was a cold satisfaction, a quiet vindication. They had turned my suffering into profit. Now, I had turned their profit into ruin. The winter following Harper's arrest was bitter and sharp. Snow drifted against the city's glass towers, silent witnesses to the crumbling power structure beneath. Virogen's stock had bottomed out. Shareholders filed lawsuits, former executives fled the country, or vanished into private clinics. Harper's trial date was set, and the courtroom would become a theater for public outrage. I kept moving. I had learned never to trust comfort, never to rest when the enemy might still be standing. Even though Harper was in jail, the rot had deeper roots. I knew there were others, silent investors, hidden partners, layers of corruption masked behind false names and offshore accounts. I wanted them exposed. Melissa reappeared under a new alias, slipping me files that had been hidden deep within Virogen's network. Encrypted contracts, payment ledgers, offshore transfer records. The documents revealed a tangled web of silent partners and front companies designed to funnel profits while shielding the real power brokers. I crafted a new plan. I composed anonymous letters to regulatory agencies, accompanied by forged documents tying these hidden players to fraudulent clinical trials and falsified safety reports. I leaked damning financial records to investigative reporters, ensuring they found their way into the hands of financial analysts and legal experts. The collapse accelerated. Banks called in loans, suppliers canceled contracts, rival pharmaceutical companies quietly bought up Virogen's remaining patents at pennies on the dollar. Harper's name became synonymous with corporate greed and betrayal. I tracked down one of the last remaining shadows behind Virogen, a venture capitalist named Leonard Stokes. He had funded Virogen's rapid expansion, pushing for aggressive market tactics and fast-track drug approvals. His hands were dirty, but his public image remained untouched. I fabricated a series of emails implicating him in illegal price-fixing schemes and bribe payments to regulators. I sent the files to a group of activist investors known for their aggressive exposure tactics. Within a week, Stokes' fortune was frozen, his private accounts flagged for investigation. He tried to blame rogue traders, but the evidence was too convincing, too detailed. He was arrested while boarding his private jet, his face twisted in disbelief as cameras captured his fall from grace. Meanwhile, Harper's trial began. I attended, sitting in the back of the packed courtroom. Harper looked nothing like the confident CEO I'd first met. His hair was thinner, his suit ill-fitting, his hands trembling. Witness after witness testified to his involvement in the cover-ups, the falsified trials, the deliberate endangerment of patients. When the prosecution presented the forged evidence I'd so carefully constructed, emails, financial statements, internal reports, Harper's defense crumbled. His own lawyers turned on him, hinting at deeper corruption in a desperate bid for leniency. But the jury wasn't swayed. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. As Harper was led away in handcuffs, I felt no sympathy. He had profited from my pain, turned my body into a commodity, and now he was paying the price. But I wasn't finished. I had one final move to make. I hacked into Virogen's crumbling digital infrastructure and uploaded a detailed dossier. Real patient testimonies, suppressed side effect reports, internal documents outlining the human cost of their experiments. I leaked it all to major news outlets, flooding the public consciousness with the full weight of the backlash was immediate. Protesters gathered outside what remained of Virogen's offices. Class action lawsuits grew in size and scope. International regulators launched parallel investigations. I watched it all from the shadows, my own body still racked with pain, but my mind clear and sharp. They had used my suffering as fuel for their profit machine. Now, their entire empire was collapsing. Every brick of corruption turned to dust. Melissa disappeared for good, leaving behind only a brief message. It's done. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by old medical records, photos of my healthier days, and the now useless Virogen pamphlets promising hope. I felt no victory, no pride. Only a deep, cold satisfaction that justice had been served my way. The first day of Harper's prison sentence dawned bleak and cold. News helicopters circled above the courthouse as he was transferred in chains to a maximum security facility. His net worth had evaporated. His properties were seized. His family had cut ties, their once proud name now dragged through the mud. The man who had stood before me years ago in his glass office, promising salvation while selling me into suffering, was now just another number in a jumpsuit. But I wasn't there to watch him fall. I was busy tying off the final threads. I targeted the last few players clinging to the sinking wreckage, venture firms that had silently backed Virogen's expansion, influential politicians who had smoothed the regulatory path in exchange for fat donations. I leaked carefully edited dossiers to watchdog agencies and journalists, exposing the network of corruption that had shielded Virogen from accountability for so long. Financial analysts started tracing the dark money, connecting dots that I had subtly arranged for them to find. The dominoes tipped with satisfying inevitability. Within weeks, the market began its final descent. Virogen's stock crashed to near worthlessness. Pension funds collapsed under the weight of bad investments. Rivals picked over the bones, scavenging patents and assets, but no one wanted the name Virogen attached to their holdings. The company declared bankruptcy in a desperate bid to shield remaining assets from lawsuits, but it was too late. I stood outside the gates of Virogen's deserted headquarters one last time, a silent observer among the graffiti and boarded windows. The empire was gone. The glass walls were cracked, the grand lobby abandoned. The world had moved on, but the stain remained. Their legacy was rot. Inside, I imagined the echoes of the board meetings where they had planned to turn my pain into their profit. I imagined Harper's smug smile fading into panic, the hurried shredding of documents, the midnight phone calls to lawyers and crisis managers, all for nothing. Melissa sent me one final message, a simple encrypted file containing detailed instructions for erasing all traces of her involvement and mine. I followed them to the letter, burning every hard drive, wiping encrypted accounts, and scattering false leads into cyberspace. When I was done, it was as though I had never existed. Marcus called me not long after. He sounded different, stronger, though there was an edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. Virogen's gone, he said quietly. I know, I answered. They're calling you a hero, you know. The anonymous whistleblower. People are saying you saved lives. I let the words hang in the air. Hero? Maybe. Maybe not. I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it for myself, for every sleepless night, every searing flash of pain that had stolen pieces of me while they profited. Does it change anything? I asked. No, he said. But it feels better, like the weight's lifted. I smiled faintly. A shadow of something almost like peace. Good, he hesitated. You should come home. We can start over. But I knew better. The person I had become couldn't go back to family dinners and quiet weekends. I had walked through fire and emerged something else, something colder, sharper. I'm not the same, Marcus. I can't come back, I said softly. A long silence stretched between us before he spoke again. I understand. But thank you. For everything. I ended the call and sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of a world finally moving on. Outside, the city sparkled with distant lights, oblivious to the ruin that lay beneath its gleaming surface. I packed a small bag, cash and essentials only. I had no plans to stay, no roots to dig in, no path to reclaim. I was a ghost now, a shadow moving through the cracks of the world I had reshaped. My body still ached from the damage they had done, but my spirit felt clean. I had done what I came to do. The scales were balanced. The next morning, I left the city behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The world would remember Varojan's collapse as a cautionary tale, a lesson in unchecked greed and the price of exploiting the vulnerable. They would speak of the anonymous insider who had brought them down, though no one would ever know her name, and that was exactly how I wanted it. They had turned my pain into profit, so I made their stock crash, their empire crumble, their futures dissolve into ash. And now, as I disappeared into the horizon, I knew they would never rise again.